Hello, everyone. Welcome to another session of literature. Today, we are going to be starting a new series that I'm very, very excited about. We're going to be looking into unknown literature. Yeah, so in this series, we're going to be looking at the different types and forms in which literature is released in, and also different topics that are not widely known that have given influential and a lot of thought-provoking philosophical and literary movements that challenges the way that we perceive our lives. Yeah, and so we're going to be looking at all these different ideas from absurdism. Next week, we're going to be looking at serialization. Stay tuned in if you're not sure about what that is and if you want to know more about it. Yeah, so today we're going to be looking at absurdism, its origins and key features, and the major works that it has been distributed and talked about in, and lastly, its lasting impact on the literary culture today. Okay, so what is absurdism? Well, absurdism really is a philosophy, a philosophical idea, and we know it really from Albert Camus that we talked about in our philosophical club session as well. Check that out if you are curious. He was a French Algerian philosopher, and he argued that life had no meaning, and it's a bit different from nihilism, because in a sense nihilism said that nothing, absolutely nothing at all had any meaning, and it was really a depressing way in which to set life. And now Nietzsche obviously is notoriously complicated in his ideas, and so I really cannot say that Nietzsche believed in a certain set of values, but essentially absurdism was different in that it said human beings are not capable of understanding life, and it is impossible for us to find the meaning and purpose in our lives. And so in a sense that we should embrace the absurdity of not having a meaning in life and live authentically, kind of like Sisyphus. That's the example that he gives in a lot of his writings. Yeah, and so absurdism is the conflict between a human's desire for meaning and purpose and the kind of the universe's indifference to this kind of search. And so in literature, absurdist works often depict characters that are struggling in an illogical or meaningless world, often repetitive as well. And this illustrates the tension that there is between personal freedom and choosing what we want to do, and having liberty in our choices and having free will, and also the external constraints of not being able to have meaning at all. Okay, so we're going to be looking at two books today. We're going to be looking at The Stranger and Waiting for Godot. So, just before we get started, I want to talk a bit about how absurdism came about. So, absurdism emerged during the existential crisis, I would call it, of the 20th century, especially during and after World War II, and philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche essentially laid the groundwork for absurdist train of thought for questioning the traditional notions of purpose and morality. And so with all the atrocities that were occurring at the time, the wars, the kind of unexplainable technological advancements that made human beings lose jobs, and that like questioned humanity itself, the breakdown of religion, and a lot of the social structures that had been present for a lot of centuries left people feeling alienated, and a lot of things that they gave purpose to people in previous centuries, like religion, had been dismantled. And so there was a crisis of meaning, right? And these kind of ideas, challenging the conventional narratives and explaining existential dilemmas, it's something that you're going to be seeing throughout these different books. Yeah, and so let's look a bit into this. As we look into this, I want you to think about the different kind of elements that absurdist literature might include. Like the characters are trapped in a meaningless cycle, an endless waiting, for example, a continuously futile task, for example, also. There can also be illogical or contradictory events that are very difficult for us to understand and are also kind of defying traditional storytelling. That's like in normal literature we would be like, oh, that's too absurd, like that just cannot occur, is something that you might find in absurdist literature. There's also kind of dark humor a lot that highlights the irony of life's absurdity. We have little, I feel like a lot of the books also have very little plot progression, very minimal, and this kind of emphasizes the repetition and futility that it seems to be pointing out in our lives. And so these continued themes of isolation, of existential questions and dreads, and the defiance that you have upon your life imposed on you is something that we'll see continuously. Okay, so let's go into The Stranger by Albert Camus. So Albert Camus was not only a philosopher, he was a writer, he was a novelist, and this is one of the first cornerstone, I would say, of absurdist literature. And this was written in 1942, and it follows Result, a man who is very emotionally detached from the life and society around him. He commits a seemingly senseless murder and faces condemnation, not just for the crime, but for the indifference that he shows to the crimes that he did, and a lot of the societal norms around justice and morality, the ideas of humanity itself. And so the novel challenges the idea that we hold usually of morality and personal freedom. And in a way, Marcel embodies absurdism by refusing to conform to the expected emotional responses. Like if you have committed a crime, you would be devastated in a lot of cases. You would regret it. Even if you were like a psychopath, a lot of people would regret it because of the circumstances that they're facing. But it's his kind of refusal to conform to anything, even remotely resembling humanity, is something that illustrates the futility of human attempts to impose meaning on an indifferent universe. And his famous trial that in the face of his death becomes a metaphor for the society's attempt to rationalize and impose order when none actually exists. And so the famous quote goes, I open myself to the gentle indifference of the world. And this line really represents his realization that of the absurdism of life itself, his kind of epiphany. And by acknowledging this absurdity and indifference, gives him a sense of peace and freedom, something that Camus raises in his philosophy. And these pivotal ideas align with Camus' absurdist philosophy, which calls for embracing life's meaningless without despair. Yeah, and so I gave you a bit of an introduction into this, but Albert Camus was a French-Algerian writer, philosopher, and he was a Nobel Prize literate. And yeah, he rejected nihilism. Instead of saying that, life has absolutely no meaning and there's nothing that we can do, he really advocated in a human response with authenticity and rebellion as a response to the inherent absurdity that we see around the world. Okay, let's look into Waiting for Godot. Now, this was written by Samuel Beckett in 1953, one of the defining works of absurdist theater. And it follows two characters, Vladimir and Estragon, and they spend time together waiting for a mysterious figure named Godot, who never arrives. And it's really a circular dialogue, a really repetitive structure, and there's a lack of resolution in the end. And this really reflects the futility of human efforts to find meaning. And so, like we pointed out earlier, absurdist literature will itself become a repetition of a sort, something that like aggravates the readers and in this case the audiences in a lot of ways by being so indifferent and repetitive. And Beckett uses minimalism, a lot of illogical dialogue as well, to highlight this breakdown that there exists between communication and meaning. And so the play rejects this traditional ideas of storytelling. There's a lot of nonsensical silences and pauses and the logic that we normally see in a lot of other theaters, and there's really aimlessness and uncertainty throughout it that underscores the futility again that we face in our lives and the lack of resolution that we are dealing with. And yeah, the famous quote here goes, "Nothing to be done." And this is the opening line that sets the tone for the despair and resignation that the entire play seemed to encapsulate. The absurd universe and the characters failing in their humanitarian effort to find purpose in this universe. And so the play really works as a mirror that that shows the tragedy of the absurd conditions of life. And the humor, the very dark humor that he uses, is also something that we can look at. It's an idea of laughing in the face of a meaninglessness. It's a very beautiful theater, I've heard. And although I have not been able to watch it myself, I actually am planning to watch it at the end of this week. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how Beckett uses all these nonsensical, incomprehensible phrases to show us the existential struggle in navigation in our own lives. Yeah, and so a bit more about Samuel Beckett. He was an Irish writer, playwright, also a Nobel Prize winner, and he is one of the most prominent figures in absurdist literature. As we have seen, his work is not far off from the kind of original work of absurdist literature written in 1942, about a decade later. And so he also lived through a lot of the things that Camus lived through, the world wars and the changing worldviews. And he wanted to use his style to explore the themes of meaninglessness, of indifference, and futility that each human beings are facing today. And so yeah, he often uses humor and despair and unsensicalness to depict the absurdity of the human condition. Now let's look at some of the cultural legacy that we see in our lives now. So the philosophy of absurdism has been adapted to modern struggles like political uncertainty, social media disconnection, and also existential anxiety that has always been a problem. And so it challenges modern audiences too to think about the limitations of logic. Like, we cannot explain away the world. The dismantling of the world in a concrete sense is just not plausible. And so what we must do is embrace ambiguity. And this approach to life and absurdism has paved the way to a lot of the literature that we see today. For example, it revolutionized the 20th century art and storytelling movements in a lot of ways, to the avant-garde movements and experimental movements. And absurdism continues to shape a lot of the ways that individuality and rebellion are promoted in the face of social upheaval and a lot of the political problems that we face today. And it's solidified its place in cultural history. So some of the impacts that I wanted to talk about was the writers that came after Albert Camus and Robert and Beckett, and who continued to talk about the themes of utility, repetition, and existential conflict. We have Haruki Murakami, for example, and Kafka not coming after him, but and Tom Stoppard also reflect absurdist influences and can be shown to talk about a lot of the life's irrationality and lack of meaning that we have continued to look at. And in terms of modern adaptation, we have a lot of examples. We have BoJack Horseman, famously, who shows us in television existential dread and really absurd humor. We also have Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and this examines memory, identity, and kind of the futility of erasing the past. And one of the and we also have a lot of digital platforms, online content, very surrealist content as well, with memes and absurd humor in the internet culture and web series that continue to showcase the evolution of absurdism and how it has been adapted into the modern mind, into yeah, and becoming a vital philosophy in the arts today as well. Yeah, so we looked a bit into absurdism in literature. Absurdist literature really teaches us that life does not require an inherent meaning to be fulfilling. By embracing the absurdity, by transforming, like Beckett, absurdity into something beautiful, into art, we can live more authentically and free from societal pressure. And I think Camus and Beckett both tried to remind us that life's irrationality doesn't mean giving up. It means fully engaging in the human experience. And in today's uncertain world, it seems like absurdism is as relevant as ever, and it challenges us to continue to see our lives in lenses of awareness, humor, and defiance. Thank you so much for joining me in yet another dive into literature. I was very, very happy to be able to share this. Absurdism is something that I really resonate with as a modern student, and I also think that a lot of other students can resonate with this as well. It's really more connectable to us than a lot of the Plato and Aristotles in the world, simply because in a lot of cases we see a lack of meaning in our daily lives, and a way to understand this better, I think, is through literature, because literature offers a way to feel the philosophy. It is a mean through which we see and breathe and live in it for a while, and it's something that I wanted to share with you. And yeah, I hope that captured your interest, that it was something for you to think about, and that you continue to stay curious about these things. Thank you so much, and bye.